Welcome everybody to another e-commerce live, and here I'm super excited to have a fireside chat this time, which is really an extension from the conversation that we started having just about 10 days ago with Marcus Cauchi and Dan Pfister here, and who we got introduced actually through a mutual friend, Joshua Smith. He's the CEO of CRO Connected, and he thought we should have a conversation. And as we were having that, we thought it's actually quite interesting because you two have such a breadth and depth of know-how and experiences on the topics that we'll go into now that we wanted to share that with everybody tuning in. So without further ado, Marcus is a best-selling author and really a thought leader and an expert on anything selling, but not just selling, really also creating long-lasting partnerships and ecosystems. And Dan here, he's the founder of Winback Labs, and as the name says, is really the thought leader when it comes to winning back customers and loyalty. I'd love to hear it in your words, Marcus, maybe a brief introduction from yourself.
Excellent. Well, thanks for having both of us on. I'm Marcus Cauchi. I'm co-founder with my wife, Suzanne, of Principled Selling and the author of Making Channel Sales Work, and also the developer and founder of the Ally Method. And the Ally Method helps high-achieving professionals to break free from the daily grind and focus on what actually matters, so that you can make confident decisions and lead with clarity. Buyers only come to sellers for one reason and one reason only. They want to make the right decision. They don't want to make the wrong decision. If you think your job is to sell, you're wrong. Human beings form part of a system. It's called a community. Our strength lies in our ability to cooperate, communicate, choreograph who does what, ensure that we co-create solutions. When we compete with one another, we spend an awful lot of time wasting energy and effort. And so when I met Dan, it must have been about 18 months ago, I fell in love because one of the things that I teach is sell hot, not cold. The idiocy of selling cold, if you ever run the mathematics of it, and we can talk about that later, a 3% click-through and a 15% conversion rate means you failed to generate paying customers, which is the reason we prospect or advertise 99.9955% of the time. Well, with Winback, you have a 26% starting point as an average win-back rate. Now, with my background in partnering and Dan's background in Winback, I put 2 and 2 together and we made 22, because if you do partner Winback, the research that you do, which Dan will explain in a moment, puts you in a position to 10x or 100x your sales with a fraction of the resource, because our motto is double the money for half the work. Intelligently lazy. And Winback is nothing if intelligently lazy. So Dan, over to you.
Thanks, Marcus. Yeah, so at Winback Labs, obviously we help companies win back their lost customers. And we focus exclusively on Winback because lost customers are this tremendous source of untapped revenue. The average win-back campaign generates $485,000, and that's for a small to medium-sized business. And of course, larger organizations make millions. And the reason win-back is such a big moneymaker is that on average, about 1 in 4 people will come back if you approach them strategically. You got this huge community and you've lost maybe 10, 15% a year, and now you can bring them back into the fold. And when they come back, their lifetime value actually doubles or more. That's what our study found, and there was a study in the Harvard Business Review that found the same thing. So it's well worth bringing these people back. And the thing, it's also extremely low cost, right? Because you've already paid the cost of acquisition. So you win these people back, they're high value, and it's low cost. So the ROI is very high. It ranges from like 32x to 180x. I mean, it's tremendous returns. And the sales are also happen much faster, right? Because you've already created this community. They already know you. They already know your product. They already know all of these things. So you don't have to educate them. You don't have to find these prospects in the first place. So we find that sales happen like 3 times faster. And I'll just add one more thing. I don't want to take up too much time around this, but when you do this win-back process, you find out why people are leaving, right? You talk to them, you understand why they're leaving, and then you try to understand what it will take to win them back. So you talk to them one-on-one, right? And you find out these things. And what's really interesting is you'll learn things from your lost customers you won't learn from anyone else, because your current customers, they're fine and they're not going to churn. They haven't churned, right? They're with you, so they're still happy, but there's something that you're missing here. And when you fix that problem, the beauty of it is that some of your current customers are on the edge of leaving because of those same reasons, right? So when you fix the reasons why these people have left, you're also going to save current customers, and we found retention rates to go up 5, 10. We've seen it go up as much as 14%. So basically, really fast, how we do this is like, first we identify the past customers we want back, right? Some of them we want back, some of them they're unprofitable or a pain, we don't want them back. So we go back maybe a couple of years and we find this group that we would like back. Then what we do is we interview them. We've got this trio of surveys with this whole process for understanding why they left, and then win back messaging and a win back offer based on what they told us, right? And then we test that, and then we fine tune it, and then we find out, this is exactly what it'll take to win these people back. This is the value you're looking for, and we offer it to them. That is win back in a nutshell.
Can I just make a point here as well? It starts with improving how we think. If you able to move to a slightly different level of abstraction and you take the data that you get from Winback, imagine what that can do internally to help you refine your processes, to remove silos, remove structural tension. One of my favorite exercises that comes off the back of this is we develop careabouts across the value chain, because what we will learn from those win-back interviews is where there is friction in the buyer's journey and where they drop off. That then tells us where there are structural problems within our own organization. The syntax that we use in the Ally method is really very simple. The first question we ask is, what is the outcome, the job to be done? And how well are we doing against the intended outcome? If we're failing to achieve that intended outcome from that entire value chain 80% of the time or worse, then what we do is we put it into triage and we incrementally try and take the fat out of the system and we remove risk. Now, the reason we remove risk is buyers instinctively, when they're making important decisions, filter for risk first. So if there is any perceived projected risk that we can remove, it stands to reason that if we do that, we will create less friction. Okay, so it involves a bit of thought. But take that data from win-back interviews. What would that tell you about your products and the deficiencies in them, or the user interface on your website, or the actual experience and the small data, the whispering, the stuff that you get from community, the stuff that real human beings talk about, the stuff that makes something attractive and instantly personally appealing? Well, you can take that data and not only 10x your revenues and your profitability, but you can 10x the value contributed per employee hour twice over. So if you want to talk about that, we can explore that too. Because if you want to take fat out of the system, you release resource and time and attention to spend on higher value activities. So if you think of it like a golem, which is a clay creature that sucks the joy out of life, and then a genie, which grants your wishes, we want to do away with the golem and then turn them into genies. And so we look at what's the job to be done, how badly are we doing, what doesn't work, what's not helping, stop doing that, what does work, what works better, what works best, and then test. Don't scale until you've tested 5 swim lanes over 3 months and 60 tests, taking the data from the win-back so that you can then apply it internally and externally. And then you get this incredible multiplier. So without any further, I'll let you carry on.
I mean, to me, even just hearing those numbers and the numbers that we see also working with brands where they really involve community, when we think in terms of lifetime value, retention, all those kind of things are just, unheard of numbers. Get a 90% rise in lifetime value once you start really engaging your community in your own space, all these things. So that the data is there, right? It makes a lot of sense. And I'd be curious to hear your view on, like, when we think of today's world, marketeers today, sales today is a lot about focusing on acquisition, customer acquisition cost. That's really what we see is very much top of mind. However, there is so much hidden value in just focusing a little bit and doing that work on winning back, retaining. What's your experience in terms of shifting that attention into this high value adding win back retention game when you talk to CMOs out there, salespeople out there, to make them really understand the value that it can unlock? Because it does sound like it's something they need to do differently, right? And whenever we hear different, it sounds like it's going to be more work and it's risky.
To Marcus's point, the beauty of win-back is it's less risky, right? I mean, they've already raised their hand and said, I want what you're selling. So at one point in time, they've already had a need. If they had the need in the past, they probably have it now, or they'll have it in the future. And they chose you above all your competitors. So there's something special about you. So these are tremendously well pre-qualified leads. I mean, your past customers, and the ones that weren't profitable. The ones that were profitable. So you can pull those out of the pool. Like, I mean, think about when you acquire a new customer, you've got no idea how much they're going to spend. You've got no idea if they're going to be very profitable or not. You already know that with your past customer. You can weed all that out. And the sales happen so much easier and so much faster, as I said before, because they already know you. Familiarity and community and all of this is like the glue that binds everybody together. And so, I know you, you know me, and that familiarity just greases the sales wheels. There's something called neophobia. It's the fear of the unfamiliar, right? Our ancestors, if they didn't know what a food was or they didn't know who a person was, they would tend to shy away from them, because if we're unfamiliar with them, we pull back. If we're familiar with them, we lean forward. That's why, again, why community is so important. And so just to give you a real one example is, so if you're reaching out to do cold sales, it's going to take you 30 or 40 touches before you can engage that person. But with Winback, it only takes 1 to 3 touches because they know you, you're familiar. There's that. When you're going to the close, I had a client and we had this big mutual fund company. They had this crazy long contract because they didn't know us. They didn't trust that we would do what we would say. So we did the contract, months of negotiation, and the person who we did the deal with, they left and they went to another company. And our contract with this other mutual fund company was a page and a half because he knew we were going to do what we were going to say, right? These people know you, you're familiar. So that just greases the closing and everything else. So I can dig into more, but I'm sure Marcus has something to say about it.
Well, I'm minded of the Tom Williams story. Tom was the CEO for a medical healthcare business. They ran a Winback campaign. Now, the data on it was fascinating because they managed to increase retention from 82 to 95%. So that's another 13% of additional profit every month, compounding. But then they won back 90%. Now, the average is 26, a 1 in 4 win-back rate. When you do the mathematics, 3% times 15% is 0.0045% effective. The 85% of leads that were not closed get passed on to sales. Sales typically used to, and this was 2020 data, and it's got a lot worse since, for a warm inbound would have to follow up 6 to 11 touches. They'd have to have 14 effective conversations with someone on the MQL list, the marketing qualified list leads, and out of those 14, only 1 in 14 would convert into a meeting, but then only 1 in 8 converts into a second. And so that gets me to think, well, with this win-back data, and by speaking to actual customers, what if I can do the impossible and I can only attract ideal customers to the top of my funnel and none of my total addressable market? If I can do that, and in fact, we've intentionally created, and it's working in the field today, a mechanism where you can use this research so that in 4 months, within 90 days, you have pipeline certainty with 200% more at the bottom of your pipeline of motivated ICP buyers. And within 120 days, you're collecting cash. And over 8 months, you can engineer out the entire cold top of the funnel operation, which means no data from the likes of ZoomInfo per SDR at 10 to 15K to 20K a pop. No tech stack, no governance, no recruitment, no HR, no management. And you can redeploy all of that money, time, and resources on something more useful, like a lottery ticket.
And let's talk a little bit about psychology then. When engaging with customers, and especially with somebody who has maybe not come back, do you sense a sort of fear of engaging with a customer? And how do you talk to your clients about this? Of like, it's okay to talk to a customer which might come back with any sort of feedback.
So the thing is, so are you saying that maybe somebody was upset with you and why would I want to go and reach out to them because I might get crapped all over? Is that kind of thing?
Right. Somebody might comment on this. Somebody give me really bad feedback.
Sure. So let's just take the worst case scenario to begin with, right? Somebody's going to give you really bad feedback. Well, your unhappiest customers are your biggest source of learning. They've taken the filters off. They're going to tell you exactly what's wrong. And then it might be useful or it might not. Bill Gates said, your unhappiest customers are your greatest source of learning. And that's what I found. So that's one thing. And here's the thing. When you talk to that person who's unhappy, let's just assume they're a reasonable person who has a real reason for being unhappy. Okay, you can't, the other type of people, they'll never be happy. But so you reach out and you say, listen, and you don't have to do this personally, right? You can do this via email to begin with. You say, listen, you left, there was an issue. We would like to get it straightened out, what you went through, like to hear about your experience. So you reach out like that. When you reach out to somebody like that, what you've done is you've said, listen, this is on us and we want to understand things so we can make it better. So there's something called the peak end rule. And what it says is the last interaction you have with somebody has a huge impact on how they feel about you. So the last thing that happened with them is they were so upset with you that they left. Okay. That's how they're going to feel about you from now on. So when they're on social media, when they're talking to their friends, they're going to be saying bad things about you. So what you do is you create a new last touch and you say, this is on us, and you invite them in, right? So now the last touch is, oh, this is fairly muted. And if you can actually talk to them and engage them in email, this peak end rule is like, you show empathy, you show caring, you show respect. And so what happens is they'll say, well, listen, these 3 things happened. And then when you try to fix a problem for somebody else, something called the pratfall effect kicks in, and they feel like you're on their side and you respect them, right? So that much more open to coming back. So you take this unhappy customer, you create a new positive last touch so they feel better about you. Then you try to fix the problem and they feel even better about you. And I'll give you just a real quick idea of how impactful this is. Marriott did a study, and what they found was that people who had a good stay at their hotel are 89% said that they would come back. But people who had a problem during their stay that was fixed, 94% said that they would come back. So it's like when you've had a problem with somebody or they've had a problem with you and you work through it, it's like you've been through a journey together and there's a bigger bond. And we find that you can take unhappy customers and translate them not only into happy new customers, but advocates. So there's a lot more to say about that, but I should let Marcus chime in.
Well, the question I think we need to ask is, what are people saying behind your back? Is it what you want them to? A lot of people who've left aren't necessarily upset or bothered by you. Something changed. Maybe new management came in and they ordered a change. How often has it gone by the wayside because you had a terrible salesperson who didn't really give them coverage? And Tony, they did a study in Australia on pharmaceutical salespeople selling to pharmacies. And the study found that there were 2 regions that outsold everyone else by 30%. So they went to go and interview the salespeople, and it turned out there were no salespeople on the territory. So that sparked an interesting question. So they went to go and speak to the pharmacist, and they asked, what's the value of salespeople? And they sort of screwed up their nose with a little bit of contempt and then said, oh, well, nothing really. Oh, no, they do give us discounts. So the 2 territories where you didn't have salespeople getting between the customer and their decision to buy, how many customers do you think they lost? I had a client who fired somebody, and in the time that person was not in territory, sales went up 34% over 4 months while we recruited because they were not in the way. Your community will tell you stuff. Your customers will tell you stuff. To pick up on Dan's point, you need to run to the sound of gunfire. Go looking for bad news. Go looking for people to prove you wrong. If you can find those things, then you can iron out the kinks and remove the risk. That's 85% of the reason why people resist buying from you, because they perceive you as a risk. Now, tell me this, Roy. If someone you know and trust recommends that you speak to someone, on a scale of 1 to 10, what probability would you say you would speak to them?
Yeah, much higher. I would say 8 to 10, depending on the topic.
Now,
For sure.
if that person brought you something that was timely, relevant, directly and personally valuable, affordable, and it was on point with your plan, what's the probability? A, you would buy from them, and B, you would not go out to the market to stiff them on pricing.
Super high.
As low as 8 out of 10 on both. That means a 64% close rate as a baseline if you can engineer and intentionally create a community and a hot MQL flywheel that only focuses on hot channels to market, never cold. And Winback is the gift that keeps on giving, because off the back of your Winback research, your customer interviews, you can create montages in the customer's voice of them telling you exactly what it's like. Imagine the impact that has on your board. Or if you're trying to get your message across about where there is a disconnect in your business and you need to enlist the service and help of other people. This is incredibly powerful, and it's not to be wasted. the caveat I would say is make sure you plan it correctly, because you can butcher a win-back campaign. And I think, Dan, it's probably worth wrapping on that. And how do you screw up a win-back campaign so that people don't go rushing off and messing it up?
The thing is that most people don't take the time to actually talk to their past customers. They do a best guess, right? Like, I think people left because of this, or I'm going to throw a discount at them because that's going to win them back. And, win back is a very strategic process. You've got to really understand the problem. Like, I mean, how much money would you lose if you threw a discount at a person when you didn't need to, when all you needed to do was fix a piece of your process or fix a piece of your product? And so when you understand why people go, then you can fix that problem for the current customers, because the current customers also have that problem. So this is something you can't guess at. And, we think we know what our customers want in that. There's a study done by a professor in University of Chicago. We think that we know what other people are thinking like 80% of the time. He says, but in fact, we only know what people are thinking like 30% of the time.
No. Let me correct you on that. That is
Okay.
for your closest personal relationships.
Yeah, your parents and your spouse. You think you know what they're thinking, and you're only right 30% of the time. So what do you think the chance?
Nowhere near that high in reality, though.
Yeah.
I think that was a clinical test, because mine, if I'm even 10% right, it's a miracle.
So we don't understand what they're thinking. So we've got to ask, because guessing is not a win-back strategy. And when you pull this back, it's so important. Like, win-back will create instant pipeline because you got all these sales qualified leads sitting right there. You can grow sales with less budget because it's so inexpensive. You can hit sales targets when timer is tight because you've got short sales cycles. You can grow market share. Like, it can do all of these things. All you need to do is that initial work to really understand your community, to really understand at a deep level your lost customers.
Right. For our benefit, help us understand a little bit about how you see Winback working within the community environment that you operate.
Yeah, so really, I mean, all those points, I mean, that's what's so resonating in what you do with very specific win-back campaigns, is that we see when you have that ongoing community in your own space, it really helps to, for one, also address and understand what people think on an ongoing basis, right? Because they will voice each other, well, they recommend this product, but maybe not that product. So you'll have an ongoing feedback loop of knowing the good, the bad, and the ugly as well. And agreed. So some of it might not be the things you'd want to see in there, but those are actually the things that are super valuable later on. And also, these are the ones that, because it is in your own environment, you can actually address in a very positive minded group of people. Right? These people in there, they're there because they like already what you do. They're not going to be wasting their time spending time there if they don't like what you do.
Well, it's really interesting. The research on both brands and human interactions and friendships tells us that the brain treats brands in exactly the same way as it treats friends. So if the audience is thinking about a brand that you used to love and then you fell out of love with it, why? It was no longer relevant for you. Maybe you grew up and you couldn't fit into your Hollister t-shirt anymore, and your England football beer gut made it look somewhat comical. Your taste changed, or your circumstance or context changed. What we need to be clear about, and this is why community and tapping into community is so important for marketers and for leadership. Your ICP probably changes slightly every 3 months. When there's a contextual shift, it changes massively. I spend my life dealing with people who were in the top 20%, but they're probably in the 16% below the top 4. And they were top performers. They were big fish in small pond. And when the context changed in February last year, they didn't adapt. So they had all this brilliant supply side sales training, which is all about selling stuff. It's about getting the product in front of customers, demoing and transacting. Well, in this context, you've got to go to demand side, where the customer is driving your product definition. Your customer is determining your brand. You don't. Your customer defines it. And if you're not listening to your community, chances are you don't even know who your customer is. So again, another really important reason for doing Winback is, first of all, a very early reset, and to make sure that you now have an operating rhythm that means at least every 90 days, you're making sure your ICP hasn't changed. Because if you're marketing to the wrong people, you create that negative ripple effect.
And it's so easy to do because Winback, you do a win-loss analysis at the end of the Winback, so you understand why the people who bought, and why the people who didn't buy. So you can really narrow in on your ICP really fast.
A lot quicker than cold calling.
Beautiful. Well, we're already at time, Marcus and Dan, and I wanted to thank you so much for having this conversation. I think it's been super insightful, and all the insights that you shared and how you do things, and also just that order of magnitude that really understanding your customer and winning back those customers has is just so impressive. So thanks for sharing that, and looking forward to continuing the conversation offline after.
Good to talk to you, Roy.
Thank you. If anyone wants to pit themselves against the top 4%, somewhere in the blurb we'll add a link to my selling aptitude test. We developed it so that it compares you with the top 4%. No one looks pretty. Okay, it's meant to be the ugly mirror. You're looking for bad news so that you can work out what you can control and what you can do in order to attain the same level of performance as the top 4%. And I'll give you half an hour. I won't pitch you any coaching. If you want to talk about coaching, tell me afterwards.
Amazing. And we'll share your links in the comments as well so everybody can find you.
Excellent.
Awesome. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Speak soon.
Thanks, Roy.